when we go first, we light the path for another.
It's time to break the mold and step into your most magical life ever. Being boxed in. I mean, that is, I think, exactly what we're facing.
We don't have to follow the mold anymore.
And Mystical Living's Katie Soul is showing us how.
Mystical Living is really about living life on your terms.
Through her corporate escape.
I didn't know how big the ripple would be. I just knew that I had to follow my truth.
To creating a community of light leaders.
It's so important that we really feel into what it is that we want to create in this lifetime and then go and create it.
Katie's heart-centered approach will raise your consciousness while giving you the courage to live in awe-inspiring alignment.
Raise your vibration and all else will flow. And it gets to be that easy.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers starts now. Hi, Katie. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. I'm really honored and excited for you to join me today.
Oh, Courtney, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It really means the world to me.
It's really fun when we get to do this because I know you have a podcast too, and having these conversations where we get to share with others our spiritual journey and what we're doing in the world is just, I think it creates a community and just so much fun. It's so much fun for me to actually see all these different people from different walks of life and how they got to where they are and what they're doing and how they're spreading and raising the consciousness of everyone. So thank you for all you're doing, and I can't wait to hear your story.
I know. And what's so cool is that our podcasts are actually so aligned to intentional living, and I have mystical living, and mine is also really focused on raising the consciousness of leaders and showing people that they can live a mystical life. And by mystical life, I think of a mystical life as a life that we consciously create. So a life that we lead by our unique design versus maybe following all the rules that society or the patriarchy or family might have shown us along the way. Mystical living is really about living life on your terms.
And that's exactly what I'm hoping to help people see, is that we can live a life on our terms. And that's part of the intentional living aspect, is coming back to who you truly are and your authentic self so that we can break free from what all these outside influences put on us, whether you said society, work, family, all those things, because we all, I think, fall victim to it. And if we can see our way through it, I think there will be a lot more. I don't even want to say happiness, because I've talked about this as happiness being fleeting. There will be a lot more contentment. I think there will be a lot more fulfillment with people.
For sure. Well, we'll show the way together through our podcasts and our communities, which is so beautiful.
Yes. So let's get in, because you definitely followed the path of society and the norm, and you went down the road of you were a very high-powered executive in the fashion industry. It's creative, which is great, which allows your spiritual aspect of yourself to come out. But you fell in line, and then one day you just said, that's enough.
Totally. So a little bit about my story is I spent 18 years with the same company, a Fortune 100 retailer. And I did, what society and my parents and what I thought the world expected me to do. I went to college. I started working. I got my MBA in the evenings, and I just kept grinding. And I had a beautiful career, and I really found joy in my career. And I wasn't really naturally built for corporate America. I was having lunch with a former colleague just yesterday, and she was looking at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, Katie, I just can't even believe that you and I," she was a counterpart of mine, "used to do the same job." It's it doesn't even compute that, you were never meant to do that. And she was right. So for me, what I did in corporate America is I took a new job every year and a half. And by taking a lot of risks and moving, I did climb the ladder really quickly, which was beautiful, or so I thought, until I realized that the ladder didn't really lead anywhere. And I had a very pivotal conversation with our COO at about a year before I left corporate America. And he was describing our culture to me. And he said, Katie, it's like a box, and you have to fit in the box to be successful here. Every level you go up, the box gets smaller, and the box gets smaller, and the box gets smaller. And he's doing this whole thing with his hands and showing me all the different boxes. And it was that light bulb moment for me where I never felt like I quite fit in. I was always obsessed with exploring the mysteries of the universe, and I would lead my team in meditations or teach them quantum spoon bending. But over the years, as my teams got bigger, it was harder to do those things under the radar. And I was always feeling a little bit at odds because I did feel like I had to squeeze myself to this small version to fit in. And I couldn't really bring all of my gifts and my magic into corporate America. And I don't think this is unique to the organization that I worked for. And it happens to so many that just kind of follow this path. And I have a lot of admiration for corporate America. I think it's a great place, and I think we need light workers and way showers. And now, at this point in my life, I'm really focused on raising consciousness with leaders so that other leaders can show up as their unboxed selves and really be present, because it's a gift to everyone. I always had the teams that people wanted to be on. People would follow me when I went to Europe, or I went to run a digital group, or whatever it was, because they felt that energy and the frequency, and the way I ran my teams was really different, and it worked. And that magic and that formula can work and can be repeatable as more leaders start to open their minds to running more conscious organizations. So that's a little bit about my story. I'm also a single mom. I have 2 young kids, and they're pretty awesome.
I mean, as you're telling that story and I'm thinking about that conversation with your boss, I can't think of a more disheartening or unmotivating conversation to have. Like, someone literally is like showing you the way out. Can you imagine? Of course, you lived it, being boxed in. I mean, that is, I think, exactly what we're facing. And I think more and more people, as we wake up and raise our consciousness, we're realizing we don't want to be boxed in. We don't want to like fit in this little mold. We're not meant to fit in this little mold. We need to be able to show our unique gifts. And like you said, that when you got to be that person, and when you got to show that vibration and show up in that way, it was magnetic.
Totally. It is magnetic, because as we raise our vibration, we more easily magnetize things that are in alignment with our desires and our dreams. And while that conversation was painful in the moment, I'm so grateful that it happened, because it was a catalyst moment for me. And I think in life, we all have these moments that are just turning points. And that certainly was a massive turning point in my life. And then I couldn't really unsee the way that he described our culture to me after that. And it was the beginning of the end for me. It did take me, just for anyone out there who's considering it did take me about a year after that conversation, to have the courage as a single parent to make that big leap. And there were a lot of steps along the way that helped to get that bravery and the courage going. And there were some things that were happening internally that were making me feel even more boxed in, that just helped to usher that wave of change for me in my journey. And now, I've only been out about a year, and I really cannot imagine ever going back into a corporate setting to work in. Certainly, I love to go into corporate settings when I can step in to help raise the consciousness of an organization and dip in. But to do that type of job, it's really not in alignment with my purpose or my strengths.
Well, isn't that so interesting how that happens? If something is not in alignment for you, or you need that push to get out, like something will happen, whether it's like you get fired from a job, or, the universe will conspire to set you on your path. But I love what you just said about you couldn't unsee it. And I think that's part of our conscious awakening. Once you do, I know it was in you and you were already practicing a higher frequency type of living. But once you see something, it's really hard to unsee it. And I think that happens when we awake, when a lot of us just begin this journey of understanding that we are spiritual beings and where we come from and how that can be incorporated into our daily life, because then everything else just seems very weird. Like it just doesn't seem to work right unless you actually follow that path.
And I think what's interesting is the universe conspires for us always in our highest good. I really believe that. And I believe that we have these maps available to us, that we come in with astrology and gene keys and human design. And what was so interesting for me around this time, I was going through my Venus return, which I don't know if you're into astrology at all.
I am. I don't know enough, but I want to learn more. So tell me more about it.
Okay, so our Venus return happens every 8 years, and it lasts about a year and a half. And I'm not an astrologer, so definitely find a great astrologer if you want to delve into this more deeply. It is not me. That is not my gift in the world, but I dabble, and I have a great shamanic astrologer that I worked with. Her name's Tammy Brunk. She'd be great on your podcast too. So I'll share her name with you. So every 8 years, we go through our Venus return. So around 40, 48, so on, there's this experience in our lives. So mine started when I was 39 and ended by the time I was 41. And so during this phase, it's really the story of Anana. And I'm actually happen to be wearing, I have this robe that I designed during my Venus return. And I call it the Goddess Anana robe. And so it's interesting that I happen to be wearing that today. Anyway, we digress. So many synchronicities. So during your Venus return, what happens is you have to take off all the layers. So it's a story of Anana going into the underworld, and she takes off her crown. So at each chakra gate, she takes something off. So she takes off her crown, she takes off her necklace, she takes off her anklets, her breastplate, so on, until she's really naked and in the underworld. So anyone who's in one of those 8-year cycles, 32, 40, 48, you can kind of like feel into this a little bit as you're listening. And a Venus return can be really beautiful if you willingly let go of the things that you need to take off. So in talking with an astrologer, they would not be shocked at all that I left my corporate job during my Venus return, because it's a big time of shedding what no longer serves us. And then the beautiful part is once we're in the underworld, then we get to ascend back out of the underworld, and we get to regain our ankle bracelets and regain our breastplate and regain our royal necklace and our staff and our crown. And it happens at each chakra gate. So during this time, I hit the underworld. I was coming out of the underworld around December 5th of 2022. And so I threw a party and I invited all of my girlfriends, all my mystical sisters and goddess friends. And I threw a Venus return party because I was so excited. I had shed so many things leading up to this moment. And then I was able to start ascending and I had them do something for me. So I set up for each of the chakra gates a little can and I had them write blessings for each of the chakra gates. And so while I was going up through the ascent, I was able to open each one, have these treasures and messages from my friends on little tidbits. And it was always so meaningful and on point when I would open them up. Mm-hmm. And so I highly recommend if anyone is going through a Venus return, find a great astrologer who can support you through that journey. And just know when you willingly release, it can be really graceful and beautiful. When you resist, it can be a little bit more feeling like the rug is pulled out from under you. So it's great to know these things astrologically or through human design, so then we can understand the cycles of life that we're going through in a deeper way. So that's my Venus return story and how this piece came to be.
I mean, that is so incredibly fascinating. I picked up my life and changed everything at 40. I moved across country with my husband, kids, sold everything, literally. And it has been a battle because, you know, I separated myself from my family, who I was extremely close with. They're still on the West Coast. I'm now in Tennessee. I mean, like, you're saying that and my mind's like kind of being blown right now. I've never heard of the Venus return. And I know I've been very interested in astrology and I want to learn more. It's just it just feels daunting to me to dive into it because there's so much we can learn about ourselves and there's so much to learn with astrology. But how fascinating. Now with your Venus return, do you experience it every 8 years or does it come around that 8-year mark if you're going to have one?
So we're always in a different Venus cycle and they last about 1.5 years. So we're all going through a Venus cycle at all points in time, but we have one that personally aligns with when we were born. And that's when you go through your Venus return. It's similar to maybe you've heard of like a Saturn return that happens like around 28, 29, 30. That can be a transition point. And then again in your 50s. And so these returns just mark points in our astrological cycle where we have an opportunity to really level up, quantum leap into a new version of our becoming.
Wow. I mean, literally, yes, I moved across country, started this company, started a whole new life. I mean, it is so in line with what you're talking about. And you just telling me that makes me it's just that realization. So if anyone else is going through that, like, there's a reason for it, you know, sometimes. And that's the interesting thing about spirituality. We look for answers and that's, you know, fitting in that box and following that corporate ladder or following the way that everyone puts things on us from the outside world. We want to look for answers of why things are happening in our life or why we're going through that or why we're experiencing that. But when it comes to actually coming home, coming back to who we truly are, there's not always an answer. There's not always a reason, but astrology can help us understand the cycles.
It can help us with the cycles. And I totally agree. Sometimes we never know what's happening and why it's happening until years later. Sometimes we never know at all. Sometimes we impact a person that we never even know we impacted. You know, sometimes that smile at the grocery store can shift the trajectory of somebody's entire day. And you may never even know that. And I think that's the magic and the beauty and the patterns in the field that we all get to create. Sometimes I call them synchronicities, but really I think as I deepen into my own understanding on the mysteries of the universe, it's really all of us just creating a new geometry in the field and creating a new pattern. And when we're creating a new pattern, then new people can come into our lives. Like this podcast, you know, we both are meeting each other at a certain vibration. I didn't know anything about you
Right.
6 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago. And at some point, we just sort of collided. And now we're able to deepen together and share this podcast. And you'll come on my podcast and we'll have these amazing esoteric conversations. And that wouldn't have happened a year ago.
Isn't that beautiful? So do you see a raise in consciousness across the board right now?
For sure. I really believe, and talking about it from an astrological point of view, that the COVID era was a really big turning point in consciousness for the collective, because people, all of a sudden, there were mandates and rules. And looking back on it, it seems kind of bizarre, right? Like somebody would tell you couldn't leave your house, or depending on your geographic area. I spent most of those early months in Florida, so it was pretty much life as usual, except I was living with my two kids with my parents, so that was a really unique experience. But it was a little bit like, masks, whatever. But when I would talk to my friends, I'm based in New England usually, they had so many rules, and they had to wear masks, and they had to go to the grocery store, and in groups, and there were just all these really bizarre rules. And I think it was that moment that the world needed to just really see, like, maybe I should ask some more questions. Maybe I don't want to put something into my body that's only been on the market for a couple months. Maybe I'm more holistic. Maybe I don't feel right wearing a mask at the office. Maybe I feel really good about wearing a mask at the office. But just that act of questioning our reality and who we are and why we came here, for me, that's been a thread throughout my whole life. Even as a little kid, I was like, I don't know, there's something more going on. Like, this is not the end of the story. And I just knew that my whole life. I just intuitively was like, I don't know, guys. And I'd ask my parents, and they were like, oh, there's God in heaven, and we go to church, and they didn't really know what to do with me. And I'm just glad that I followed that thread throughout my whole life. And now I believe, we're always learning and expanding our consciousness, but I do feel that my personal consciousness is at a different place than it was a decade or 2 decades ago. And the collective consciousness has really shifted too. And it's beautiful to watch and witness and be a part of. And even when it comes to like returning to work and questioning, like, oh, do I want that lifestyle anymore? Right now, we're hearing a lot of buzz about companies saying you need to come back to the office that maybe previously allowed people to live in different states. And I was just talking to somebody about that earlier last week, and she was really questioning, like, I moved my whole family to North Carolina, and now you want me to be in New York every week? And what really do I want out of life? Do I want a life where I'm getting on an airplane and commuting back and forth every week? Does that feel good and juicy to me? And it's so important that we really feel into what it is that we want to create in this lifetime, and then go and create it. And we don't have to follow the mold anymore. More people are waking up to that.
I mean, I love that, how you say you have to feel your way into that, because that's where, that's where all of our intuition comes from. That's where our feelings, that's where we are going to be guided, is more in that feeling. And I'm not talking about emotions. It's like, what feels in resonance with you? What feels right? Because I mean, I'm the first person to be extremely guilty of it, of getting in my head. My mentor is always telling me, stop trying to figure it out. Just do it. Just go. Like, we know as a child, you knew that there was something more. I mean, even like your friend and the company telling her you need to come back to New York. At a certain point, you're like, why am I allowing this corporation to dictate and control my life. And that's where I think when you
Totally.
really look at it in that way, it's like, who are you to control me? You know, like when did we give our power over to such other people to do this? And it's becoming more mainstream that I think that we're kind of going, I don't know about that. I don't know if this
Yeah.
is okay. And I think that's what I've seen personally in the Raise of Consciousness is just the conversation being open to a more mainstream group. We don't have to be so
Yeah.
woo. You don't have to be so
No.
crazy. It's not like this outward weird thing. It's real and it's part of our everyday norm. And I think that more we see people that are quote unquote normal talking about it, I think that shows me that the society, the world is ready to elevate together.
Totally. And we each create a ripple when we create change in our own lives because it impacts everyone we touch. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
have so many conversations now with former colleagues that are saying, "Hey, Katie, I'm watching you now. You did that thing. We're always
Mm-hmm.
told the grass isn't greener on the outside, but it looks like your grass is pretty green." And I get to tell them, you know what? It's like a whole different shade of green outside. And sometimes we're so conditioned that the box is really the safest place. And
Mm-hmm.
I like Gay Hendricks has this book called The Big Leap. It's a really great book. And he talks about our zone of excellence and our zone of genius. And in our zone of excellence, it would have been like me and my corporate job. I was good at it. It brought me lots of security and income, and it made people in my life comfortable. They felt like, oh, Katie is like safe. She's secure. She's, she's good.
Yeah.
But our zone of genius is really our passion, our purpose, what we feel so energized to do every single day. And now that I get to live in that zone of genius, certainly I don't have it all figured out as an entrepreneur. I'm on the spiritual journey of entrepreneurship and I'm learning so much every day. But in the
Mm-hmm.
past year, I've lived at least a decade of life. I've been to Avalon and Egypt and Sedona, and I'm headed to Nashville next week. I mean, I wrote a book in Laguna. I've been all over the place over this past year. I'm really living my best life. It is totally exceptional. I would not trade it for anything. Even the big cushy paycheck, they could offer me more than $1 million a year. I would not return to the box. And that's my mission now, is to help organizations to understand, and leaders, that there is another way, that it doesn't have to be about squeezing to fit into a mold, when we as creator beings can just bust through the mold. And we're here to create. We're here to have experiences. We're not here to, rush to drop your kids off, to rush into a day full of back-to-back meetings, to rush home, to not have dinner with your kids and just see them to tuck them into bed. That's not what we're here for. And with having a 9 and 11-year-old, I'm so present to that now. I mean, once we were home during those COVID years, for me, there really was no turning back, because now I saw everything that I was missing in their lives. I saw the difference when you have a conversation when they just get home from school and all they have to share, which is really different, like 4 or 5 hours later. There's just less, it's in the past for them, and they live so well in the present moment. And now I get to be here and experience all of those little moments. And there's so much magic in those little moments with them.
Well, that was one of the best gifts of COVID, because my kids were born right before COVID and like right at the tail end of COVID. So I had two kind of COVID babies.
Yeah.
And so my husband having to work from home, and I was working in LA. I was working in television at the time. And all of a sudden I was home, and we were both home with the kids in such formative years. And we looked at each
Yeah.
other and he goes, I don't know if I could ever go back to a physical office again. When first COVID started, he thought he thought he would have a hard time being out of the office. He thought he wanted that, that camaraderie and being there. But then after experiencing being home with the kids and with me, it was kind of like this, wow, look what I would have missed out on. He got to be there for every moment. We
Mm.
both got to be there for every moment of as they, there's so much that happens in those that first year, first 2 years of their life, the development, and neither of us got to miss it. So there was that blessing of it.
Mm.
But then
Yeah.
also you talking about the change that we create. So, I mean, that was good in that aspect. But when we go back to what you were saying about change,
Yeah.
it makes people comfortable for us to stay the same. I think that is
Yeah.
such a huge topic and something that we really need to discuss more of. I've heard it described as like the crab in the bucket, where,
Oh,
if
yeah.
someone is getting out, all the other crabs are going to pull them back in,
Yeah.
because everyone
Mm.
wants people to stay the same. You don't want to
Mm.
release them to change because it makes you uncomfortable watching someone else change. So if you are the
Exactly.
change maker, it is hard. It takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of
Yeah.
courage. And there's a lot of unknowns when you do step out and do something different that scares the people you love.
Yeah. And that's really what it is they're scared for two reasons because you're growing. And what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean to them? Does that
Exactly.
mean they're stagnating and you're gonna outgrow them? Or does
Mm-hmm.
it give them an opportunity to grow alongside you and have their own experience? I mean, I have so many former colleagues that I've been able to witness have that growth experience
Yeah.
alongside of me because when we go first, we light the path for another. And it's just so freaking cool. And not all of them have done it in the way I've done it. A good friend of mine saw what was going on in my life and she decided she wanted to stay with the organization and work part-time. And so she
Mm.
went through a series of events and synchronicities where I coached her on how do you go through all these parts
Yeah.
and really dream into what do you want your life to feel like? I think this is so important because sometimes we go to the bare minimum, like, oh, I could only have this. But we really dreamed big on exactly what she wanted to create. And in months, she created exactly what she wanted. She also happened to lose 20 pounds in the process, just happened to, because she was, for the first time in a long time, so happy with where she was going and seeing the light. And now, she's been out for a few months doing her part time and she has young children and she's just so happy and it's beautiful to watch. And I have so many examples like that just within my own network of people and clients who have had this growth experience. And sometimes we just have to be like the stone that we throw into the lake. And that was my role, as being the stone thrown into the lake. And I didn't know how big the ripple would be until after the fact. Honestly, I didn't even think about the ripple at the time. I just knew that I had to follow my truth in that moment. And it was uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I worked for an organization where the average tenure was 18 and a half years. So it wasn't a place that people left, especially people who were well loved. And so it really did, create a lot of people to say like, oh, but if Katie's leaving, what does that mean for me? And
Right.
maybe I have to look in the mirror. And for some people, they did that willingly and learned a lot through it. And other people, it's very hard to do. And perhaps they're not ready to look in that mirror. And that's okay too. And also, it's beautiful to stay in corporate America if that feels right in your heart. It just didn't in mine.
So how do you dream into the life you want? How do you dream big into the life you want? Because, I mean, that talks about manifestation and creating abundance and the law of attraction. And I know you talk about the law of resonance. So, like, how do we dream into our ideal scenarios?
Okay, so I'll share. I have a formula that I take my clients through. And it's what's worked in my own life and just studying with various teachers over the years and have pieced it together in my Katie way. But it starts with shedding the shit. So we actually just start with shedding things that really aren't in resonance with what feels good. And sometimes that means literally shedding things in your closet, shedding things in your home. Sometimes it can then lead to bigger things like shedding a marriage or shedding a corporate job or shedding an aspect of your identity that no longer is a fit. But first, we just start shedding the little things, just start to cleaning up our space, because in order to create new, we have to create room, right? You know, if our glass is full, then how are we going to add new things on top? We got to pour some water out in order to add some like fresh, crystalline, structured water into that glass. And so we start with shedding the shit. And then we go into an exercise about discovering your purpose. And I look at this through 3 different pathways. One, I look at it from an inner child point of view, because like we spoke about earlier, our little people were so wise. And often the things that we loved as kids have relevance in our lives now. We've just sort of forgotten. But when we came in, we were wise and we knew and we were savvy to the things that really lit our soul on fire. So we tap back into that energy. And then we go through a human design exercise. Out of all the maps available to us, I think human design is the easiest to understand because it's just simpler than astrology or gene keys. It's a great formula. And I often use my human design app with clients. I think they do a really great job of explaining human design. So we look at their design, and that tells us about like how they get their energy and what their life theme is, which is an indication of their purpose. So for example, for me, my life theme is to snap people out of their minds, bring them into their hearts to experience higher states of joy, bliss, and ecstasy. And what's so cool is now I get to live out that theme. All of my work centers around quieting the mind and taking the elevator ride down to the heart. And I talk about it like the mind is where our human self lives, and the heart is where our divine self lives. So everything is always about every practice or process or lesson we go through is always your first dropping into your heart space. So just to wrap up, then we do a final exercise on purpose, which is about 3 lives. And I have this really fun exercise that everyone goes through. It's a journaling exercise. And I give them 3 like pretty significant prompts on, you know, what would your life look like in these various scenarios. By the end of those 3 exercises, they really have a clear indication of like, oh, okay, now I'm like connecting the dots on really what I'm here to do and what I want to do and how I want that to feel. Then we do a manifestation exercise, which I call Manifest with the Sun. We work with the actual sun in the morning, and we work with different rays off the sun. And our big manifestation that we're calling in is the center of the sun. And then each ray is something that we feel when that manifestation occurs. And what's cool with a ray is you can bend a ray. So you can pull rays forward. So we get into a little bit of time bending in the manifestation work. And a lot of the manifestation part is, like you mentioned about the law of attraction, is what we typically hear in a traditional manifestation course. And the law of attraction is great. However, what's often missed is the law of resonance, or the law of vibration, as it's often called. And really what the law of vibration is telling us is we need to start vibrating the cells in our being at a frequency that's in alignment for our desires. And when those two things match up, then things just magnetize into our lives. And that's what we finished with. And it's about walking as your future self, and even to how you adorn yourself, how you dress, when you put a bracelet on or a necklace, or the color that you choose to go out in, and really dreaming into that frequency that your future self vibrates at. And that's the sequential process that I take clients through, mostly in group settings at this stage. But when I was first testing out the formula, I did a lot of one-to-ones with clients, which was really a beautiful way to hone and tweak and refine the process. And now I do groups, and it's really solid and so much fun. And it brings me great joy.
I love your process because there's so many different aspects of that I've spoken about and I talk about and I try and teach about, but you've brought them all together so beautifully, like that inner child. It's been a topic that I always come back to, is how our children are just so divinely connected. They come in knowing, and it's like, as parents or society or teachers or whatever it is, we have a tendency to shut it off for them. And then, that is one of the things I hope that we can do now as we raise our consciousness, is to allow our children to stay connected. I know we're always connected, but stay aware of that connection, so that in their 30s and 40s, they don't have to go searching for it again. I mean, it sounds like you as a child stayed connected for pretty much your whole life, but, that they don't reach that 30, 40-year-old stage being like, I don't get it, or like, what, there has to be something more. Let's allow them to be their spiritual self from day one and not stop it.
Totally. And that's naturally going to happen. As the parents raise consciousness, they can't help but keep that open channel for the kids too.
Oh my God, it's so amazing. And the more of us that do that, the more it's going to be accepted. But then also taking it back to like the journaling prompts, I think there's so much that can be said and happened in our development and in our connection is by journaling and writing.
Yes.
It's such a huge thing. And I know a lot of people say, I'm not a writer, or I don't know how to journal. My husband, does that same thing. And I took him through a practice to teach him how, because I am a writer. I'm like, well, you don't have to do it like me. But since he started, he now has a practice of journaling all the time. And he's had like some of the biggest epiphanies of his life, these realizations that can help change the trajectory. So you don't have to be a writer. It's just something about the act of, and I always say, pick a pen you love, get a piece of paper, don't type it, like literally write it. It's that energetic action.
Yes, I agree with you. It's definitely not a typing thing for me either. And I'm not a writer. It's not my go-to modality. I would do this all day long versus write. Although somehow I did write a book this year, but that was more just came through me. I actually dictated a lot of it, which helped me. But my favorite practice with automatic writing is I just write a question at the top of the page, something that's on my mind or my heart that I'm maybe struggling with or don't know which way to go. Because when we don't know which way to go with something, we're always in our head. And I share this with clients because our heart doesn't know duality. So the heart has only one truth. So the heart, if you're like, should I date this person or this person? The heart knows the truth. It's the mind that has you wishy-washy or going back and forth. But the heart doesn't have duality. So if you find yourself in that wishy-washy phase, it's a great exercise to just say, let me automatically write, because it naturally drops you into your heart. And you can't not but write from your heart space.
Well, aren't your hands that portal to your heart?
Yes, your hands are your portal to your heart. And sometimes even just massaging the center of your hands, your portal points, can really help to open that channel too. So it's just a beautiful way to drop into your body as well.
Well, and then also you talked about like shedding the shit. Huge.
Yeah,
I think,
dude.
we've all we've all heard about, decluttering and things like that, but I don't think it's it's really that common knowledge, like how much it changes your life when you let go, and that vacuum it creates for the right things to fall in. And even like you said, like you've created a whole line of things that you can fill your closet to bring that energetic vibe, raise your frequency. But you can't put that in there if there's not room for it. You have to open yourself up to what
Totally.
resonates with you now.
Yeah. And for me, I worked in fashion. I had a really
Yeah.
full closet at all times. And I probably always will have, clothes are just a way that I express myself. And I find a lot of joy in fashion. And now I
Hmm.
have a clothing line. So that will always be a part of my life. But my closet was full of what I called corporate Katie. So when I came out,
Yeah.
it was really this year of shedding the corporate Katie identity, what
Hmm.
she wore, how she spoke, what she acted. Even
Yes.
my first business that I built out of corporate was really corporate. It was an
Hmm.
online marketplace, which we still run a component of it, but it was not from the heart. It was about
Hmm.
making money and transacting and
Yeah.
profitability because that's what I knew. And so I shed a lot of elements of what I spent time building in my first 6 months because as I got more comfortable in my skin, I realized that I could do it in this more Lemurian way, this more organic, heart centered frequency. And at the time, I just wasn't there yet. I didn't know that was available to me. And I did the best I could with the tools that I knew and understood.
And isn't it amazing when you finally do it from the heart and you stop figuring it out and you stop doing it from a place of, what am I going to get from this? How everything aligns to
Oh
work
my gosh.
out in your favor, how that abundance comes in, how the miracles happen, how the opportunities and doors are opened. And I know it's been talked about, but until you experience it, I don't think you really realize it.
I know. I'll share an example just from yesterday that was so fun. So I was in Sedona last week, and my hairdresser is really quite shamanic and really is
Hmm.
stepping into that aspect of herself. And she has been having this whole thing with cardinals. And when I was in Sedona, I
Mm.
found this artisan who did a cardinal on a stone and was like, I have to bring this back for Julie. So I bring it back and I wanted to drop it off on the way to meet my colleague for lunch yesterday, my former colleague, but there were no parking spots in town. I was like, oh, kind of like, all right, well, now is not the moment. So I go, we have lunch, and then on the way back, I find a parking spot. I run down to her salon. I give her the cardinal stone. We have a moment. And then I'm walking out of the shop and across the street. The salon has a clothing store that's very, very high vibe. And it's really the only place local to me that I would consider wholesaling my line.
Hmm.
And I walk in just to take a peek, and I feel these two women behind me. And like, oh, I kind of turn and I notice that one is the owner of this shop and the salon and multiple salons. And she's very rarely in town. I haven't seen her since I was a kid, really. And she, early in her career, used to cut my mom's hair. And so I knew her. So I said hello. And the woman next to her said, oh my gosh, what are you wearing? Like, who designed that? And I said, oh, it's my line. And so then this woman, Gretchen, said, oh my gosh, we have to do a pop-up shop here in the store. And oh, by the way, my friend who is now trying to get trying to get the contact details for me. She runs this really large magazine in New England. And she's getting my details. And it was a beautiful experience of I had felt in the back of my mind, ooh, this store would be a place I could really see my line in, because it's very ethereal meets everyday. It's high frequency. I design the line at different sacred sites and see what comes through from the divine. It's not, going into a traditional retail store. It's really a special kind of place. And I had felt into that. And then the universe just delivered it to me. It wasn't something I consciously wrote down, like, I want my line in this specific store. It was just sort of a feeling like, okay, that would be nice. And it gets to be that easy. And not only, when we ask for things from the universe, sometimes we want and we desire and we hope. But when we can move into that frequency of knowing that we're walking into our destiny, then things just start to come in with ease and grace and with so little effort. There was nothing I needed to do. And it was even better than that feeling I got, because now another person who's in the press is interested in my line. And who knows, this just happened yesterday, where all of that will go. And it does get to be that easy once you start really understanding frequency and vibration and energy. And really, when I first came out of corporate, the message I kept getting from the divine was, raise your vibration and all else will flow. And it's so potent, because it is really that simple. And it does require us doing the inner work. It requires us looking at the things we need to shed. It requires us looking at the uglier aspects of how we show up and creating change. It requires us to move our bodies. It requires us to be conscious of what we consume, whether that's food or television or friendships or whatever it might be. But when we do all that, we really do raise our vibration and create a whole different experience of this reality, which I'm sure you've experienced too in those divine synchronicities in your life.
I mean, that couldn't have been more divinely planned. Even the fact that, like, the parking spaces weren't there at the beginning, the timing. I mean, divine timing is like, if things aren't working out for you the way you want, like, that's okay. Like, let it go, because it is being constructed by the universe to work out in your favor at all times, even when it seems negative. I mean, this is a beautiful story, a happy story, but it's even when you're going into some of those more hard moments, like, if you can, and it's, I was having a talk with a friend the other day. She's going through some really hard stuff in her life. And I was advising her, just take it day by day. Stop trying to look at far in advance. Like, this is all happening for you in a way. And that's really hard to hear sometimes in the moment. But when we can step out of it and realize that it is working out for us, even those hard moments, like, it's just, life becomes really fun.
Totally. And today my life might seem like cupcakes and rainbows, but I have been in those hard moments. I 5 years ago was married to a man who fathered my children, who struggled deeply with addiction. It was a very, very challenging time in our life. And addiction is a family disease. And it can be a very isolating disease. And for me at that time, I had a feeling that, his drinking was turning into something more. We were getting to an age, that people still drank from time to time, but it just didn't quite feel right. And my intuition knew, and I would question what was really going on from time to time. But there was a piece of me that didn't really want to look under the covers. And so what happened was I started going numb. So every night, my hands, my feet would go numb. We purchased a house during this phase of life that was crumbling, literally, crumbling. And so all of these aspects of our reality were crumbling. There were cops at my door. He ended up, it came out that he was using drugs and ended up at rehab, and then came back and we were rebuilding. And then one day he left a letter on my pillow and said, I'm out. And so I share this story because while it might seem like all these exciting things, I also want to speak to the people that are in that moment of despair when you're physically crumbling, your house is crumbling, and by the way, I was, I was running an entire digital organization for 5 US brands at the time. So my day-to-day life was complex too. And certainly like water cooler conversation about the cops showing up at your door didn't really jive quite well for me. And the response from this boss I had at the time was just to pile on more work when I told him what was going on in my life. And it breaks my heart to think about that now. And I remember that feeling of like, really? Like, that's what this person thinks is going to help in this scenario? My entire life is crumbling, and he thinks more work is going to be a good distraction for me. I think in those moments where you're like, this feels so wrong, to trust yourself and know that is so wrong. And well, that wasn't the moment for me to leave. I do have a threshold on change, but going through that experience of my life crumbling, my marriage crumbling, it did give me a lot of power then to leave corporate America, because I had been through what I had considered one of the worst changes somebody could go through in life, is your family falling apart. And there's other very traumatic things that can happen. But for me, that was high on the list of just crappy cards to be dealt. And when the day after I got the letter on my bed, I went and I met with my now ex-husband, and I said, look, I can give 95% to this relationship. Like, can you just give 5? And he said, no. I said, I can give 99. Can you give 1%? And he said, no. And it was that moment where I said, okay, like, I got it. I get the message. Like, and it really was the right thing, because it allowed him to go on his own healing journey. He doesn't use drugs or alcohol anymore. He is really committed and active in NA and AA, and that's been a big part of his life. He's working, he's thriving, and he needed to do that alone. And we needed to come together to have these 2 beautiful children. And now we get to have this really gorgeous co-parenting relationship. But it didn't happen overnight, because there was so much healing that both of us had to go through during that life experience. And I knew always, like, there was light at the end of the tunnel. I knew it wasn't a defining moment for me. I knew that life would be lighter again. And it is. And now I get to really beam love back to that version of myself who went through that. And really just to know, if somebody in your audience is going through that right now, there are brighter days ahead. Yeah. And when you're in that moment, it does feel really dark and really crummy. And just to know from my story and countless others who've been through these scenarios in life, there are always brighter days ahead. And you just have to keep following the light, the little glimmers of light that you get, and lean into those.
I mean, it reminds me of what she said to me at the moment when we were having the conversation. She's like, I can't believe this is my life. I can't believe this is my life right now. And I started thinking about that phrase. And I'm sure you felt that in your moment.
Oh my God. I'm pretty sure I said those words.
But if you think about it now, you're probably saying that same thing. I can't believe this is my life. Like, look at the energy
Totally.
you put behind those statements. So
I know.
that I can't believe this is my life can change into, I can't believe this is my life. It's just in your
Yeah.
inflection. I mean, those words work in both
So
scenarios.
true.
How cool is
Yeah.
that?
It's so cool. And words really do matter because when we're communing with the universe, the universe doesn't get like, I hope for this. And we say stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
But I know is something really clear. I know this is my future reality is such a powerful statement or affirmation or mantra, however you want to use that. But our words really do matter. And it's the little things because especially with our kids, they hone in on every little thing they're picking up from the world, from their parents, and really being conscious about, okay, what are you sharing? What's the spell you're casting through the words that you speak?
Well, through your words, how can we follow yours? How can we work with you? Where can we hear your podcast? Where can we buy your line?
Amazing. I would say the 2 entry points into all things are my website, which is mysticalliving.co. We didn't get the .com, but I like the .co. It kind of works with the vibe. mysticalliving.co. And I'd love to connect with your community. And I can't wait to have you on the Mystical Living podcast. And you can find that all the places podcasts are played.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait to continue our conversation on your show. And thank you so much, Katie. It was such an honor and a beautiful conversation we got to have today.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to be on the other side. It was really fun. And I wish you the best day.
And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, Katie Soul, for such a beautiful conversation all about leaving the box that we are put in and really following our purpose and our path. So many great takeaways. I'll put all the information of how to work with Katie, get her clothing line, and so much more in the show notes below. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers and Intentional Media on our website at CourtneyMyers.com. That's where we'll have all the information about everything coming up, our new book, and our new courses that are in the process of being built. Cannot wait to share those with you. Stay tuned, follow, watch, subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.